Welcome to part 2 of the Worksheet 12 demo video. I'm not quite sure if there'll be a part 3. We'll see if this goes on kind of long, and if it does, I might, stop it and make a new one. But let's pick up where we left off. And that was with practice question number 5, which is to use a for each loop on an int array to find the average number in the array. So first things first, let's just set up our array first and fill it with some numbers, and then we'll talk about for each loops. So I'm going to actually just make a new function up here. I'm going to comment out question 4, and I'll make sure question 5 runs at start. And let me close up some of these so we don't see them. And then down here, I'll make question 5. So private void question 5. And to save some time, I am just going to do some copy pasting. There's no reason to write everything all out again because I already did. I already created an int array and filled it in question 2. So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste some of this. And if you need to refer back to the other video on how to do this, feel free. But I'm just going to, get my 10 element array, fill it with random numbers, and we can take this out. We don't need that. So just kind of like the basics of this. So we have a nice 10 element array with random numbers. So what it wants us to do, and we take another look at that worksheet, is use a for each loop to find the average number in the array. So if you remember how to find the average number, you need to use find the sum and divide it by the number of things that you added into that. So first things first, should change this. We talked in the last video about using the length of the array rather than just a hard-coded number. So let's take the opportunity to fix that here. So it should be int array.length that this for loop runs. That's a little bit better of a way to do that. So what is a for each loop? For each loops are super handy because their whole purpose is more or less to step through every single element in an array and look at it, and we'll talk about all the different pieces of it as I type it out. So to create a for each loop, you'd write for each, and then in parentheses you have to tell what type of variable is this array. Is it an int array? Is it a string array? Is it a game object array? What type is it? And for us, we're working with an int array. So we write int, and I'm going to use the word element. And this word can be whatever you want. All this is for is this is like the temporary variable name for whatever whatever step you're in the for each loop. So this can be whatever you want it to call it. We could call it Joe or Susie, whatever, but it kind of makes sense to name it something kind of obvious. And element's a pretty decent one. And then we write in, and then which array are we stepping through? We are going to step through the int array. So the way this kind of works is, in the for loop up here, in order to access, each spot in the array, we use this int to kind of count through it. And we write the int array x to get that specific element that we're currently working on. But in the for each loop, all we then type in is element. So in order to do our sum, we are going to first need to make our int sum is equal to 0, just like we did in a previous question to find, I think it was question 3 or something like that, to find the sum. But in here, rather than saying like sum is equal plus equals int array x, we just say sum plus equals element. So that each time, it's going to cycle through the whole array, and it's going to take that element and add it to the sum. So I'll go through the next one, add it, add it, add it, and it will go through the entire thing. So for each loops are really amazing to use. if they are appropriate. If you can use a for each loop, I would recommend it. There's less that can go wrong. You know that you're going to step through the entire array. You're not going to get an out of range exception. And you can manipulate it a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to deal with the information. There are caveats to for each loops, and we're actually going to talk about that in the next question. But if you, for instance, need to, add up all of the elements in an int array, this is a great use for that. If you need to concatenate a string array into one single string, it's another great use for that. But let's talk a little bit about let's finish up this question because we need to, we have the sum, now we need to find the average. So in order to find the average, we just need to take this sum and divide it by the number of elements in the array. So I am going to actually do that with a float. Since, usually if you divide by a number, you're going to get a decimal. I mean, we're working with 10, so it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But better safe than sorry. So we'll say float average is equal to sum divided by int array dot length. So we don't have to hard code that 10 in. We might actually not get the correct decimal, but that's okay. We'll deal with that. It's okay. And that's it. We can just then print this average to the console. So we'll do print average plus AVG. And let's test this out and see what we get. So we'll go back to Unity and give it a second to catch up. We'll hit play. Going to go. Yes, no? What's it doing? Oh, 10. Oh, 4. There it goes. There, it popped in. So now we can, try it again. 5. If we really wanted to test it, we would probably print out all the numbers and then make sure that the average is correct. And that's it for this question. And we'll move on to the next question. So the next question is going to be to try to use a for each loop to fill an array and analyze what happens. So let's try that. We'll make a new function, and we're going to see what happens with that. So we'll just go back here, close this up. We'll comment this out and do question 6. And down here, we'll write that out. Private void question 6. And let's we'll just do a real simple array. We'll just do another int array and try to fill it with random numbers. So we'll write int array is equal to new int, and we'll just do like a 5-element array just for something different. And now we will do our for each. So let's type that out. For each int element in int array. And we will just then set those elements to random numbers. So we'll say element is equal to random.range. And we'll say, we'll do the 1, 10. And we should be okay. But notice we're getting an error with this. And if we kind of hover over that, we should be able to get some, because we set this up right. Like, why are we getting this error? If we hover over it, it says, cannot assign to element because it is a for each iteration variable. So this is an extremely important concept that you need to understand, and this is one of the ways that you cannot use for each loops. You can't make any alterations to your array with a for each loop. So we can't fill the array. We wouldn't be able to like add numbers into what's being stored in there. The only thing we can do with for each loops is look at the information. So this isn't going to work. We can't actually fill this with a for each loop. We would have to do a for loop to put information into the array, but we can use the for each loop to read information from the array. So keep that in mind when you're trying to decide if you want to use a for loop or a for each loop. For loops, you have to use for loops if you want to step through the array and put information in it or change information. Like what if you had an array of ints and you wanted to -1 from every single element? You would have to use a for loop to do that, otherwise it won't work. For eaches, though, are a lot easier to set up and they're good for reading that information. I would definitely, if you're just trying to read information from an already created array, use a for each loop, but you can't alter it. So question 6, this is what it's that's the whole point of this, is you can't change your elements with a for each. So let's go on to the next one. 7, create a UI in Unity for allowing a user to click a button to generate an array of 10 random ints and display them. All right, so you're gonna see a jump in the video because I'm gonna jump to the UI already being created. So, pause here and you can set this up yourself too. All right, so I have the Unity editor stuff done. I just have a button that I put question 7 on the text, and I have this text object called Q7 text. I did go ahead and create my public void question 7 for the button click event, and I went ahead and hooked up my question 7 button to that question 7 event on the game controller. So make sure you get this all set up so that you should be pretty good to go with the coding part. So this one is kind of straightforward, but the difference between what we've been doing and this is we actually need to display all of those numbers nicely in a text object. So we can't just do, change it 1, change it 2, change it 3, because if we change it each iteration, we're only going to see the last number because it's going to update every single time we go through the for loop. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to concatenate all of those numbers onto a single string, and then afterwards we can put it on the text. Actually, I have an idea. Why don't we practice doing for loops and for each loop? So if you want to do it all in one for yourself, that's fine, but we'll step it out. So we'll use a for loop to fill the array, and then we'll use a for each loop to create our final string that we're going to put in the text object. So I do need to go up here. I did forget to do my public text. I call it like Q7 text, I think, in the Unity editor. So I'll just call it Q7 text here too. So first things first, it's a 10 element array. We should just be able to do our for loop. We can't do a for each since we are changing the elements of it. Oh, I totally am getting ahead of myself and forgot to declare my array. Let's try that. Int array is equal to new int 10. Okay, let's go back and try that again. For int x is equal to 0, x is less than int array dot length x plus plus. All we then need to do is say int array x is equal to random dot range, and did I specify the range? 10 random ints. I didn't, but let's be more interesting with this. We'll just do 1 to 100. So let's do 10 to 100. So they're all 2-digit numbers. So 10 up to including 99. And that's all we have to do to fill it. Next, let's actually use a for each loop to create our display string. So first I need to, make my string that's going to be my ultimate string, and I'm just going to call it toPrint. I'm going to set that equal to nothing because we're going to concatenate our information onto there. We can then just do for each int elements in int array. We then just say toPrint plus, and I'll step it out because I want to make sure that I get a nice space in there. So I'll say toPrint is equal to toPrint plus element plus a gap, because we don't want those numbers to kind of run one into the other. We want a nice little space after, so it'll put the first element on and a space, get the second one, a space, third one, and then a space, so it'll print really nice. After all of these, we then just need to change our Q7 text to that. So we'll say Q7 text is equal to print. That's it. This is a really important little snippet of code. You will probably be doing a lot of stuff like this because it's an easy way to take an element and get it in a nice format to display. So you might want to make a note of this and how this works, because you will probably have to do it again. And let's see, let's go in and check. I do need to make sure that I didn't remember to I gotta put my Q7 text right there. So let me get that set up real quick. And let's try it out. Click on this. Let me get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, and we'll do it again. And we get our random numbers. Pretty easy, not too bad. All right, let's go on to the next one. All right, so there's probably a little bit of a jump. Again, I set up my UI for the next question, so you don't have to sit there and watch me do this, because you should be able to do all this stuff by now. So the next thing is, once this button is generated, we should be able to find the sum and the average. And we probably should set up some code so that these don't turn on unless this button's clicked, but for the sake of time, we're not going to worry about that, but that would be a good practice if you wanted to do it on your own, because we've covered it a couple times. You should be able to figure out how to make these inactive until this button is clicked. But we'll just make sure that we always click that button before we click sum and average. So sum. The one problem though is, now that we are using our array outside of this one question 7, right now this is scoped to question 7. If we try to do our on sum button click and on average button click, it's not going to know what our int array is. So we're going to have to move this out of our question 7 and make this a class level variable. So I'm actually going to highlight this, Control X to cut, and I'm going to go all the way back up to the top, and I'm going to make it a private, because we can make arrays class level, and this means it is now accessible to everything. And that might cause a couple problems since we did use it in other questions. So I'm going to make sure that all of this code in start gets commented out. So actually, what would be probably better? What if we just rename this to, rather than an int array, we can call it like my array, and we'll make sure to fix that in question 7, just so we're not getting any scope issues, because the start would change things and it could get potentially really messy. So we'll call it the my array now, and we'll just have it at the top. So let's go down here and let's make sure that we fix this, because this should say my array and then my array, and then this one has changed to my array too. So now that class level array will get filled when we click the question 7 button. And once we do that, we should be able to then find the sum of that. And this should just be, we kind of already did this before, but just to review, the best way to do this would probably be to use a for each loop. So first things first, I'm going to make my counter. So I'll do int sum, set that equal to 0. I'll say for each int element in my array. I still need to put that 0 there. And we'll say sum plus equals element. And then we should be able to just print that. I'm sorry, no, we're not printing it, are we? We have to put it on that text object. So we'll say sum text.text. And I just, during that pause, I did come up and add an average text and a sum text to these public texts so that I can manipulate them. Sum text.text is equal to sum.toString. We have to make sure we're converting it to a string since we're not concatenating it with any other strings, so it won't implicitly turn it to a string, so we have to do it that way. So why don't we save it and just make sure that this is working. I did also hook up my buttons, so if you haven't done that, make sure that you do that. So we hit play, and we'll generate our array, and then we'll hit sum. Oh, I know what I forgot. Sorry about that. I forgot to hook up my new text, so let's try that. I always do that. I get ahead of myself. Let's try that again. Got our array and hit sum, 606. We should be able to generate a new array and click sum. And we could do this, over and over again if we wanted to, but we know that's working. So the next thing to do is going to be to find the average of those numbers. And if you remember, to find the average, we need to find the sum and then divide by the total numbers. And we don't want to have to recode that sum, do we? We already kind of figured out how to do this. We're finding the sum up here on sum button click. It's not in the greatest of formats to reuse, but why don't we take this opportunity to practice chunking this out into its own value returning function so that we can reuse it also in on average button click. So let me just make sure. Yeah. So let us just, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make a new private int called add array. And we're not sending anything to it, but what it's going to do is we are just going to copy this code, put it in here, and then just return that sum. And then back up in the onSum, we can get rid of this. And rather than sum is 0, we can call this add array. So we'll say int sum is equal to add array. So we chunked this out into its own value returning function. It's going to then add up all the numbers in the array, return it, and it's going to, back in the Unreal editor, I'm sorry, the Unity editor, it's going to look exactly the same. It functions exactly the same. The benefit is now down here on the on average button click, we can call it again. We can say int sum is equal to add array, and then we can say float average. I'm gonna set this equal to a number real quick. I'm hoping to get the decimalness with it, and sometimes you have to kind of force it too. And we'll just say average is equal to sum divided by my array dot length. We can then change our average text dot text to average dot toString. Don't forget that dot toString because we can't just throw that in that text. It has to get converted since we're not concatenating it. And that should be it. So to kind of summarize, we already found the sum, but it wasn't in a really great form that we could easily call it in our average button click. So what we did is we broke it off and made a value returning function so that all this does is it returns the sum of that array. So we fixed up our onSum button click, so now it's just 2 lines of code. You probably actually could condense this down to 1 line of code, because you could just say add array. You could do this if you really wanted to, if you want to be super fancy. Like this works too, which is kind of fun. And then we were able to recycle this then in our average button, since we had to find the sum and then divide it by the length of that array and then post it to the string. And if you really wanted to challenge yourself, you could also do this in 1 line of code too. But we'll just do this for now. We'll save this. And we will go back to Unity and we'll test it out. Keep in mind that we do have to click question 7 first. Question 7, sum, and then the average. The bonus too, since we don't necessarily have to find the sum first. We could get our new array, click average, and then click the sum, and it should be the same. I guess our decibel's not working. That's fine. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky with that. So we have this question done. That is the end of this question. And looking at the last couple, those kind of went together, and the last 3 go together closer, at least. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to stop the video, and I am going to make a part 3. So to do questions 9, 10, and 11, look for part 3. But I'm going to start that video with the UI already in place. So make sure that you take the opportunity to do that as well.